Reverend Michael Ryan, and the church here was dedicated and open for service in 1884, but it was a long way from completion in 1884. This particular, the spire for instance hadn't been built at that stage, the boundary walls hadn't been filled, and internally there was a lot missing as well. There was no pews in the side aisles for instance, the main pews were in place. I think the altar rails were still missing, and a lot of the stained glass windows which came in later, they hadn't been in place at that stage. So it was opened for service in 1884 by Archbishop Thomas Croke. He was the same Croke who became patron of the GAA. Later on in 1884, November 1884, Archbishop Croke, Charles Stewart Parnell and Michael Davitt were invited to become patrons of the GAA, and they accepted that invitation. And of course, since then, Archbishops of Cashel and Emly have maintained that patronship of the GAA. And I can recall, going back to the 1960s, that the Archbishop Cashel and Emly, Dr. Morris, used to throw the ball into the All-Ireland final in particular. That's stopped now, but you'll find that even today the winners of the All-Ireland Minor Hurling Championship, the cup is awarded each year by the Archbishop of Cashel and Emly, and that continues as such today. So here we have this particular church, and Michael Ryan became administrator of this parish between 1880 and 1890. For 10 years he was administrator of the parish. Now the administrator means that he was doing the job of a parish priest but didn't have the title, if you like. The bishop was effectively the parish priest of this parish, Hallsgreen and Temple of Braden. And the parish was dedicated in a particular way to support the expenses of the bishop, because it was called a mensal parish. And the parish, the archbishop was effectively a parish priest here during that particular period between 1875 and 1929. It was a mensal parish, and I can recall in the 60s when I went to secondary school, I had the great pleasure of studying Latin. Maybe a lot of you maybe haven't met Latin, but the very first word I came across when I was introduced to the pleasures of Latin was mensa. Mensa, 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 means the table. I was interested in to find a use for that particular word. I had no use for it in the meantime, but when it came to mensal parish, we know where that particular word came from. The table of the Archbishop, and the funds from the parish were there to support the table of the Archbishop. It was the mensal parish. So Michael Ryan then was administrator of this parish between 1880 and 1890. In 1891 he called a meeting of the parish at the previous church, which was in the site of Sarsfields Primary, half a mile away from here. And the decision had already been made to build a church. The people weren't consulted about whether to build it or not. They were just there to fundraise, essentially. That was their main function. And starting in July, 10th of July 1881, the date of that particular meeting, the process of building and working at this church sort of developed. 1881, as I said, that was the starting process for this particular church. And one of the first things I did was choose an architect, and an architect from Dublin, Walter Glynn Doolan, designed this particular church. He was very popular within the Diocese of Cashel and Emly. He designed 6 churches within County Tipperary. There's just this one in County Limerick. He designed churches in Kerry, Waterford and Wexford and Dublin and Antrim. A lot of churches around the country, and he was particularly popular within the Diocese of Cashel and Emly, and for that reason he was chosen to design this particular church. The design of the church is what's called Gothic design, Gothic renewal style. The Goths were a tribe from East Germany who flourished about 1,000 years ago, and they had this particular type of design called Gothic design, and it became popular again in the 1800s, the Gothic renewal period. Particular features of it is this pointed door frame, for instance. Pointed door frames, pointed windows. It's called the pointed style of architecture, and it's the roof, for instance, is a very sharp roof we have pointed features spread around the church in various possibilities. The archways, instead of being round, they're pointed archways. We have this steeple here as well, a characteristic of Gothic style as well. And this Gothic style was very popular at that particular time. Another feature with here is these buttresses here. Here we call these buttresses. They're there for support of the walls, but also for decoration. Without those buttresses, it would look much more severe, if you like. So they're there for decoration and for support purposes as well, particular features of this Gothic style. Now, as I said, the second half of the 19th century saw an explosion really in the development of Catholic infrastructure, convents, schools and churches, and that was really as a result of an easing of the penal laws. The penal laws came in after the Treaty of Limerick 1691, and 150 odd years later they began to ease, and the Catholic and nationalist sentiment began to be renewed, largely, as I said, as a result of easing of the penal laws. Also, at that time there was a newspaper in the mid, about 1840 I think it was, a newspaper called The Nation, a national newspaper promoted by Thomas Davis, Gavin Duffy and others, and this promoted nationalist sentiment and nationalist ideas and nationalist concepts, if you like, and also same for the Catholic Church. It saw a huge renewal of confidence within the Catholic Church. So you would find that a lot of churches were built in the second half of the 19th century, 1850 onwards, and particularly of this Gothic style, as I said. Now, the 1800s saw, in the middle of the 1800s, saw the famine 1845 to 1850, and following that, the population of this parish, the population of Temple Braden, went down from 1457 down to 666, and that's what it was in 1881, when the process of taking on the challenge of this church here was started. Now, although the population decreased after the famine, due to the famine and immigration, there was a farming, if you like, and the world food prices were expanding, if you like, and farming expanded. It was a very happy time, if you like, for the tenant farmers in Ireland, if you like, and they were able to pay their rent and so on easily. But suddenly, in 1879, world food prices dropped. Irish tenant farmers were unable to pay their rent, and at that time there were landlords into which you had to pay your monthly rent or your yearly rent, and they were unable to pay their rent. Suddenly they were unable to pay their rent in 1879. That led to the foundation of the Land League, and Father Michael Ryan was very active also in the Land League. When he came here, he was the leader of the Land League in this region as well. And we know all of this because he kept a scrapbook and a notebook, and a lot of the details of the things he was interested in that happened at the time are in this notebook. It's now in Glenstal Abbey, and it's fascinating to see the events which happened back there brought to light in front of you. So that really was the era then in which the process of starting the building of this was taken on. It was a difficult particular period, as I said, because of land agitation and economic reasons. And interestingly enough, this church here was refurbished in the 1939-1940, the beginning of another difficult era in which major refurbishment was taken. And last year, of course, we know, major innovation occurred as well, a time of some economic challenge as well. So a lot of the things that happened to the church were at times of particular difficulty. Okay, the church then itself, as I said, it's a Gothic style design, and most of the rock, the stone here, this stone here, most of it is coming from the locality here. There are 3 quarries within a mile of here, which most of the stone, the main body of the church was used. There's a quarry here in Tlahila Warila, half a mile away from here. That quarry now is filled in and closed. You can't really see any evidence of it. But it's in land owned by John Joe Fadal, in Tlahila Warilla. There's another quarry by the Dwyers in Garrydoulis, and there's another one, the third one was from the Graces. I see some Graces in front of you here. I do indeed. There's another quarry then beside late Liam Grace's house, and I've actually been in to see that quarry, and you can see the drill marks and the cut marks which the masons at that time undertook, and it just reminds you that all of that was done without the help of any power tools. Everything was done manually and with a hard way. So most of the stone here comes from those three quarries, and some of that stone was replaced in the recent refurbishment with stone from that Grace quarry. The higher section of the spire here used stone from the quarry which the contractor was Thomas Newsom from Newstead from Fermai. He got the contract within a tender of £3,000 to build his church. He got the tender, and he used the quarry which he had himself for the more finer stone up along the spire, because there was a lot of carving and detailed carving to be done on that. But some of the stone around the doorway here, I believe this stone here is slightly different as well. It's all limestone, but it's different from a different quarry. There's a quarry called Garry-na-Cothera. I don't know if you know Garry-na-Cothera. It's in the back road to hospital, if you like. And that stone is used around the doorways, around the windows as well. You can see some stone, that's sandstone there as well. But we don't know where that came from. Apparently there was lots of sandstone quarries around. So it could have come from anywhere. I don't know where it came. Okay. Anyone wants to ask a question at any time, feel free to do so. So the business of building the church then started in 1882, and the foundation stone was put down in 1883. Archbishop Thomas Croke was here to mount that foundation stone in 1883. And Archbishop Croke was, he was a nationalist leader at that particular time. He was very popular because he supported the Land League, he supported events of a nationalist nature like the GA. He wrote a letter to the GA accepting the offer of patronship. And that's the letter is in Croke Park now. It's a letter outlining really the function of the GA and the operation of the modus operandi. Brilliant letter. He was particularly appropriate. He was particularly good as a narrator, and it would have been great if he was here today to help out. But we're doing the best we can. He was famous as a narrator. He was a leader in the nationalist community. He was a great supporter of Charles Stewart Parnell. Parnell and the business of Parnell occurred at the same time. So it's a time of great change in Ireland, great challenges, and Archbishop Croke was a leader in all of that. He was also a church leader at that time. So when he came around, massive people came to help and see him and hear him talking, because each time he came, he also went to Sarsfield Rock, like you're going to do today, and spoke from Sarsfield Rock on 3 occasions which he came here. He came in 1881, 82, and 82, 83 and 84, 3 years. Massive crowds came, variously described as between 7,000 and 10,000. An incredible crowd of people, because we can recall 3 years ago we had a Sarsfield 320. But getting 7,000 up to 10,000 people here on occasions like that, in times when transport systems are much more minimal than they are now, road systems were much more difficult. We believe 7,000 to 10,000 people. Each time, as I said, he spoke on Sarsfield Rock, and all of that is recorded in a way that it's very unusual for a church at that time. There are very few churches which have the documentation and the history of it recorded as this church has been recorded. And, okay, so where do we go next? What we'll talk about next? Okay, Father Michael Ryan was the administrator of this parish, and he lived just across the road here. priests of the parish, instead of living in palaces or Nicker as they do now, lived in Ballinity House, which subsequently was owned by, bought by William Reardon about 1930, and now of course Margaret Moore lives in that particular house. The priest of the parish lived there, so he was familiar with this area. He picked this particular site here, and he knew the location beside Sarsfields Rock, and he knew that he could take advantage of that for fundraising, and he knew it was a good location because we know that panoramic view is surrounding from the church here, and particularly from the rock itself. At that time, the owner of this land here was a Mrs. Fitzgerald, the widow Fitzgerald. She donated the site for this particular, the site for the rock here, the site for the church here, and she was the landlord of a, she was a tenant of a landlord called Erie Lyde, major landlord of this area here, and he in turn was renting the land from another big landowner called Thomas Bennett, who lived near Patrick's Well in Limerick. Now Thomas Bennett gave the site in perpetuity, free for perpetuity to the church, and it's now owned by the Catholic Cashel and Emly Diocesan Trust. These are the owners of this site here. However, the sporting and mineral rights for this area here, and this church in particular, are owned by somebody else. They're owned by the descendants of Richard Singer Keating, a fellow called Keating is his name, and he was a farmer in Ireland, but he was really a British businessman and politician, and served in the House of Commons as an MP for many years. And his descendants now still have mineral and sporting rights in this area. Now I don't suppose any of them have come today, any descendants of him today, probably not, because the only descendants that I could find for Mr. Keating is a fellow called Batton, Jake Batton, who was living in Australia. And interestingly, he married a granddaughter of Winston Churchill. So there's a link here to Winston Churchill going back to that particular time. And he's living in Australia at the moment, and his son is also living in Australia. And that's all recorded because the son has recently been sentenced to prison because of a drugs heist. So probably won't make it here today. Okay, another aspect of the church here, you know, there's that British connection with Winston Churchill, but there's also the other side of the 1916 conflict is also represented here in a particular way. The altar inside of this church here is made from cane stone from which comes from France, a particular type of stone which is probably easy to carve, in detailed carving which you might need for an altar. And the people who carved that and installed that stone was a called James Pearce, the father of Patrick Pearce, William Pearce, who of course was on so there's a connection on both sides in the 1916 conflict here at this particular church. There's a connection with Patrick Sarsfield, and there's a connection of course with all the parishioners here, and a lot of those are recorded, and the business of fundraising, for instance, is recorded in a very detailed way. Some of it in the notebook and the scrapbook which I said is in Linstad Abbey. One of the things which they did, they were very innovative in trying to get, by the way, when they put down the foundation stone, they made a collection as well. £700 was collected on that particular day. Wow. When they dedicated the church a year later in the 6th of July 1884, they got £830. Massive collection. Because there was a massive crowd here, an incredible crowd here, and you might wonder how they managed to get their way here. There were special trains put on, excursion trains from Limerick and from Thurles, and I read about one particular train which came from Thurles to Limerick Junction, but when they got to Limerick Junction, all the transport had been used up. They had to turn around and go back. They didn't make it yet. Okay, but one little interesting bit about the fundraising was that they had a fete and a bazaar centred on Sarsfields Rock around that time as well, and I think that made about £500. And the details of that and who was there and who was present and who collected the money were all recorded. Now, there was a prize the top prize on that particular occasion was a horse, which was owned by Michael Ryan as well, Father Michael Ryan. He donated a horse, and that particular horse was related in horse fashion, of course, to a famous horse called the Lamb. Now, the Lamb was a horse which won the Aintree Grand National in 1868, won it twice in 1871. So he had a very high pedigree. He was trained in Cappamore, and the horse came from Cappamore as well, near where Father Michael Ryan came from. He came from Cappanoo, near Cappamore. So folks, maybe that's enough to talk about the church at the moment. If anyone wants to ask any questions.
Just in relation there to the Keeshins.
Yeah.
That Singer Keeshin, his father was Henry Sheehy Keeshin,
Yeah.
who was governor of Mauritius in 1804. Took it from the French into the Bourbon at that time when he took control of it. But Sir Henry Sheehy Keeshin's wife
church reopens on September the 11th. Here's the history book, which I recommend. Some of the details, all the details I talked about today, and information about Bishop Dwyer and the Keating family as well.
And there is another interesting connection, because the man, you probably heard of Michael Doherty, who was the Young Ireland leader. He was married to Jane O'Dwyer, who was the daughter of Morgan O'Dwyer, and would have been the aunt of the Bishop of Limerick in 1886 to 1917, Edward Thomas.
Yeah.
So there's those connections.
Yeah, and even Father Michael Ryan mentions asking the Bishop of Limerick and collecting money in Limerick Church at that time.
Well, his father was buried in Cullen, but he was reinterred back in Limerick again later on, and the Bishop decided that he shouldn't be in Cullen, he should be in Limerick, so he was reinterred in Limerick.
Yeah. So folks, the book will be available €10 Sunday week. I recommend that. Just say one little thing is, I was talking to Paddy Kramer earlier, and he reminded me, and again it's mentioned here as well, that one of the stonemasons, of course a lot of the stonemasons come from the Adair area. I think there was a lot of quarries in that area as well. A lot of masons were based in Adair. And he was here, Paddy Dundon, came to this area, married a local girl, and lived where the Kramers were subsequently to live, beside the creamery in Sassy. And that was a lady called Mulvihill, I can't think of her first name, Julia Mulvihill. And he's buried Paddy Dundon. I think he died in 1941, and he's buried in Temple Braden graveyard.
And just one link there, Richard. Was the church the previous one to this one? Was it the one in the creamery? So he was right up to this one built there.
That was built in 1834 by parish priest at that time, Father Mahoney. And prior to that, the church was in where the graveyard is now, in the middle of the graveyard. And prior to that, we believe there was a church in Nacorn. There's indication that there was a church somewhere in Nacorn.
And that Father Mahoney is the man that carried out one of the very few census of any area of Buchanan. And it was done here, I think, around about 1834. So there's a census of
the record is still available?
And the record is available. Yeah. So that's very, very unusual that he carried that out.
Yeah.
Most of the census at that time are described. I think they took a census every 10 years, starting I think about 1821 or 31.
1821.
Yeah. But up as far as 1901, most of those, the detail of those censuses were described, but there's reports on those censuses, and that's where I got the figures for the numbers in the parish in 1891. There were 666 people resident in the parish at that time. It's not the direct records of the census, but it's a report of the census. And it said some of the documentation was burned and it was recycled in various ways, described, and some of it was described in the 1922 Civil War.
Very good.
Cool.
Okay, folks, thank you.